The dust kicked up around her boots as Beatrice Morgan stepped into the wild-eyed chaos of 30 mustangs circling the temporary corral like a tornado made flesh. And every rancher who had tried to break them had walked away bruised, bloodied, or worse. It was September of 1882 in Vulture City, Arizona, and the sun beat down on the desert landscape with relentless fury. The town had sprung up around the Vulture mine years earlier, drawing prospectors and dreamers seeking gold in the unforgiving terrain. Now it was a place where only the hardy survived, where water was precious, and tempers ran hot as the scorching winds that swept through the canyons. Beatrice had arrived 3 weeks prior, riding a worn-out mare and carrying everything she owned in 2 saddle bags. She was 22 years old with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that told stories of hard labor. Her dark hair, streaked with copper from years under the sun, hung in a thick braid down her back. Most women in Vulture City wore their respectability like armor, but Beatrice wore men's trousers and a cotton shirt faded to the color of sand. She had learned long ago that propriety would not feed her or keep her alive. The townspeople had whispered about her from the moment she rode down the main street. A woman alone, without family or husband, was an oddity that made the decent folk uncomfortable. The saloon girls thought she was trying to compete for their clientele. The ranchers' wives thought she was after their husbands. The truth was simpler and somehow more threatening to their ordered world. Beatrice Morgan wanted nothing from any of them except to be left alone to do what she did best. She could gentle horses that other men would have shot as too dangerous to handle. The mustangs in the corral had been rounded up by a crew from the Double K Ranch 2 months ago. They were wild as the wind, descended from Spanish stock that had escaped or been released generations back. They had never known a saddle or bridle, had never felt a human hand except in violence. 3 ranch hands had tried to break the lead stallion. One had a shattered collarbone. Another had lost 2 teeth and gained a healthy respect for the power in those hooves. The third had simply quit and taken the next stage out of town. Robert Kendrick stood at the fence line watching this strange woman walk calmly toward the maelstrom of horseflesh and fury. He was 26, tall and lean with the kind of weathered face that came from years of honest work under the Arizona sun. His dark hair curled at his collar, perpetually damp with sweat in this heat. He had taken over management of the Double K after his father's death 3 years earlier, and the weight of keeping the ranch profitable sat heavy on his broad shoulders. He had hired Beatrice on a whim, or perhaps out of desperation. She had walked into his office above the feed store where he conducted business and told him flatly that she could gentle his wild herd where his men had failed. Her price was steep: room and board plus $50 once the job was done. $50 could buy a lot in 1882, enough to keep a person fed for months. But 30 unbroken horses represented an investment that was currently worthless, dangerous, and eating through his hay supplies. "You will get yourself killed," Robert had told her bluntly. "Then you will not have to pay me," she had replied with equal directness. Now he watched as she climbed through the fence rails with a grace that reminded him of a cat. She carried nothing but a coil of rope over her shoulder and a quiet confidence that seemed absurd given what she was walking into. The mustangs sensed her presence immediately. The lead stallion, a magnificent bay with a black mane and wild white-rimmed eyes, wheeled to face her. He was easily 16 hands high, all muscle and fury and untamed spirit. Beatrice stopped moving. She did not raise her arms or shout or wave the rope. She simply stood there, breathing, being. The stallion pawed the ground, sending up clouds of dust. He tossed his head and snorted a challenge. Behind him, The rest of the herd milled nervously, ready to explode into panicked flight or aggressive defense. Time seemed to slow. Robert found he was holding his breath. Other ranch hands had gathered at the fence, drawn by the spectacle. There were murmurs and a few poorly disguised laughs. A woman, trying to do a man's work. It would be entertaining to watch her run for the fence in terror, they thought. But Beatrice did not run. She stood perfectly still as the stallion began to approach her, each step deliberate and threatening. His ears were pinned back flat against his skull. His teeth were bared. Everything about his posture screamed danger. Beatrice slowly lowered herself to sit cross-legged in the dirt. It was such an unexpected movement that the stallion actually stopped, confusion flickering through his aggressive display. She kept her eyes down, not challenging him with direct eye contact. Her breathing remained slow and steady. She began to hum, a low, wordless melody that was barely audible over the sounds of restless hooves and heavy breathing. Robert had seen a lot of horse-breaking techniques in his years. He had seen men use ropes and force, breaking an animal's spirit through exhaustion and dominance. He had seen gentler methods too, the slow, patient work of building trust, but he had never seen anything like this. The bay stallion took another step forward, then another. His ears were no longer pinned back. They swiveled forward, curious. Beatrice remained motionless except for the rise and fall of her chest, and the soft humming that seemed to wrap around the corral like a spell. The other horses began to settle. Their attention focused on their leader, and this strange human who did not behave like any human they had encountered before. When the stallion was close enough that his breath stirred the dust near her boots, Beatrice slowly extended one hand, palm down, fingers relaxed. She did not reach toward him. She simply offered. The stallion stretched his neck out, nostrils flaring as he took in her scent. Minutes passed. The men at the fence had fallen silent, transfixed. Then, with a movement so gentle it seemed impossible from such a powerful creature, the stallion lowered his head and touched his nose to Beatrice's palm. She let him investigate her hand, her wrist, her arm. She gradually lifted her other hand and laid it on the side of his face, just below his eye. The stallion trembled but did not pull away. "Sweet boy," Beatrice murmured, too soft for anyone but the horse to hear. "Nobody wants to hurt you. You are magnificent just as you are. But this world is not kind to the wild ones. Let me teach you how to survive it." Over the next hour, Beatrice did not try to rope the stallion or force a halter on him. She simply sat with him, stood with him, walked with him. The other horses watched and gradually approached, their natural curiosity overcoming their fear. By the time the sun had climbed to its zenith and the heat was nearly unbearable, Beatrice was surrounded by the herd. They did not press in on her threateningly. They simply accepted her presence as something neutral, neither predator nor prey. When she finally walked back to the fence, every person watching wore an expression of amazement. Robert stepped forward to offer her water from his canteen. She took it gratefully, drinking deeply before pouring some over her dusty hands. "I have never seen anything like that," Robert said, and he realized his voice came out rougher than he intended, thick with an emotion he could not quite name. "They are not evil," Beatrice said simply. "They are afraid. Everything they have learned about humans has taught them that we bring pain. I am showing them something different." "How did you learn to do that?" A shadow passed over her face. "Necessity. Hard lessons." She did not elaborate, and Robert sensed that pushing would be unwelcome. "How long will it take?" "To gentle all of them, as long as it takes. You cannot rush trust. It grows at its own pace or not at all." Robert nodded slowly. He found himself studying her face, the strong line of her jaw, the way her eyes remained calm even after what should have been a terrifying experience. There was a stillness to her, a centeredness that he envied. His own life felt like a constant race against disaster, trying to keep the ranch profitable, manage the men, live up to his father's legacy. This woman seemed to carry no such burdens, or perhaps she had simply learned to carry them differently. "The bunkhouse is full," he said. "But there is a small cabin at the edge of the property. It was the foreman's house before we built the new one. It needs work, but it is sound. You can stay there. That will do fine. I will have one of the men show you where it is. I can find it myself if you point the direction." There was something in her voice that suggested she preferred not to be escorted, not to owe anyone more than necessary. Robert pointed toward a cluster of cottonwood trees perhaps half a mile from the main ranch buildings. "Through that grove. You cannot miss it." Beatrice nodded her thanks and started walking. Robert watched her go, noting the way she moved with purpose, wasting no energy on unnecessary motion. The other ranch hands were dispersing now that the show was over, talking among themselves in animated voices about what they had witnessed. "That is the damnedest thing I ever saw," said James, the head wrangler. He was a grizzled man in his 50s who had been working horses since before Robert was born. "Pardon my language, boss, but that woman has got something special, something you cannot teach. Can she actually gentle them all, you think? Or was that just a fluke?" James stroked his weathered jaw thoughtfully. "If anyone can, I would wager it is her. Takes a particular kind of person to see past the fear to what is underneath. Most men just see a dangerous animal that needs to be dominated. She sees a thinking, feeling creature. Makes all the difference." Robert found himself thinking about that as he went about the rest of his day's work. The Double K was a substantial operation, running cattle primarily, but also breeding working horses. The mustangs had been rounded up with the idea of breaking them for sale, cavalry mounts and ranch horses that could handle the rough terrain. But they had proven too wild, too difficult. Selling them to a slaughterhouse would recoup some cost, but would be an admission of failure. If Beatrice could actually gentle them, it would be profitable, and also, Robert had to admit, it would feel right in a way that killing them would not. He saw her again at sunset. He had ridden out to check on water levels at one of the distant stock tanks, and took the route back that passed by the old foreman's cabin. Beatrice had opened all the windows to let air flow through. She had swept the place out. He could tell by the pile of debris outside the door. A small fire burned in a ring of stones she had constructed in the clearing, and she was cooking something in a battered pan that she must have carried in her gear. Robert reined in his horse. "Everything suitable with the cabin." She looked up, her face lit gold by the flames. "It is fine. Better than many places I have stayed." There was a story there, Robert thought. A woman alone, drifting from place to place, clearly accustomed to making do with little. It was not a common path for a woman to walk, especially not in 1882 when society had very fixed ideas about a woman's proper role. "Where did you come from before Vulture City?" he asked, then immediately wondered if he was being too forward. But Beatrice did not seem offended. "Colorado. Before that, New Mexico. Before that, Texas." She turned the contents of her pan with a wooden spoon. "I go where the work is, working with horses, whatever I can find. I have mucked stables, cooked for ranch crews, done laundry, mending. But working with horses is what I am best at, so I do it when I can." "How did you learn?" "Your family," her expression closed off slightly. "No, I taught myself mostly. Watched others who were good at it, read what I could, but mostly I just spent time with the horses learning their language." Robert sensed he had pushed as far as she was willing to go. "Well, I am grateful you came to Vulture City. Those mustangs were becoming an expensive problem." "They will be worth the wait," Beatrice said with quiet confidence. Over the following days, Robert found excuses to be near the corral where Beatrice worked. He told himself it was good management to keep an eye on such an unusual situation. He told himself he was just protecting his investment. But the truth, which he was slowly admitting to himself, was that he was fascinated by her. Beatrice worked with the horses for hours every day. She never forced, never rushed. She moved among them with that same calm presence, touching them, speaking to them in low tones. She introduced them to ropes by laying the coil on the ground and letting them investigate it. She draped blankets over fence rails and let the horses come sniff them, get used to the sight and smell of the fabric that would eventually become saddle pads. The bay stallion, whom she had named Courage for the bravery it took for a wild thing to trust, became her shadow. He followed her around the corral, his dark eyes watching her every movement. When she sat, he would stand near her, occasionally lowering his head to blow softly in her hair. It was a tender gesture that made Robert's chest feel tight for reasons he did not fully understand. On the fourth day, Beatrice slipped a rope halter over Courage's head. The stallion trembled but allowed it. She did not tie him or try to lead him. She simply let him wear it, get used to the feel of something around his face. By the end of the week, she was leading him around the corral. By the end of the second week, the other horses were accepting halters too. The ranch hands stopped making jokes about the woman trying to do a man's work. They started gathering to watch whenever they had a spare moment, drawn by the quiet magic of what they were witnessing. Even the most hardened cowboys, men who thought they had seen everything, admitted they were watching something special. Robert brought her fresh water one afternoon when the temperature had climbed past 100 degrees. The Arizona desert in September could be brutal, and he worried about her spending so many hours in the sun. Beatrice accepted the water with a nod of thanks. "You should wear a hat," Robert said, noticing how flushed her face was. "I have one. Left it at the cabin this morning." She drank deeply, then poured some water into her cupped hand and offered it to Courage, who lifted it up gently. "I could have one of the men bring it out." "No need. I am fine." There was that independence again, that refusal to ask for or accept more help than absolutely necessary. Robert wondered what had made her so self-reliant, what circumstances had forced her to be so guarded. "You have got a gift," he said, watching how the horses responded to her. "I am not sure I have ever seen anyone with such a natural way with animals." Beatrice was quiet for a moment. "Animals make sense to me. They are honest. A horse will not pretend to be something it is not. It will not lie to you or betray you without reason. Treat them well and they remember. Treat them poorly and they remember that too, but they do not play games the way people do." There was a weight of experience behind those words, Robert thought. "Bad experiences with people," she glanced at him, her green eyes unreadable. "Some, but I suppose everyone has those." "That is true enough." Robert thought of his own past, his father's disappointed silences when Robert failed to live up to impossible standards, the woman he had courted who decided she would rather marry a banker in Phoenix than a rancher in Vulture City. "Though I reckon some have it worse than others." "My father drank," Beatrice said suddenly, the words coming out flat and matter-of-fact. "When he drank, he got mean. My mother died when I was 12. After that, it was just him and me on a failing homestead in Texas. He blamed me for everything that went wrong. Said I was useless, said I would never amount to anything. By the time I was 16, I knew I had to leave or I would not survive." Robert felt anger kindle in his chest, not at her but at the man who had treated his own daughter so cruelly. "So you left." "I waited until he passed out drunk one night, took the gentlest horse we had and rode away. I have been on my own since then. That was 6 years ago. That took courage. That took desperation." She turned back to the horses, clearly indicating the personal conversation was over, but something had shifted between them. Robert felt it, a small crack in the careful walls Beatrice kept around herself. She had let him see a piece of her past, given him a glimpse of the pain that had shaped her. It felt like a gift, though he suspected she would have scoffed at such a sentiment. That evening, Robert found himself riding out to the old cabin again. He told himself he was just checking on his employee, making sure she had everything she needed. He brought a better lantern than the stub of candle he had seen her using, and a thick wool blanket since the desert nights could get surprisingly cold. Beatrice was sitting on the small porch she had repaired, cleaning her tack by the fading light. She looked up as he approached, wariness flickering across her face before she controlled it. "Brought you a few things," Robert said, dismounting and pulling the items from his saddle bag. "Nights can get chilly. I have managed fine. I know you have. But there is no sense suffering when there is no need." He set the lantern and blanket on the porch. "Consider it part of your room and board." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to determine his motives. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." Robert found he did not want to leave. The ranch house would be empty and quiet. His younger sister had married last year and moved to Tucson with her husband. His mother had died when he was young. It was just him and the hired men, and while he got along well enough with them, there was a distance that came with being the boss. But here, with Beatrice, there was something different. Maybe it was her solitude that matched his own. Maybe it was the way she did not try to impress him or flatter him or angle for more than she had earned. "Mind if I sit a moment?" he asked. Beatrice gestured to the other end of the porch. Robert settled himself on the weathered boards, stretching out his long legs. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that only the desert could produce. In the distance, a coyote called, long and mournful. "It is beautiful out here," Beatrice said quietly. "For all its harshness, there is a beauty to this land. My father used to say the desert either breaks you or makes you fall in love with it. There is no in-between." "What did it do to you?" Robert considered the question. "Both, I think. It broke some illusions I had about what life would be, but I cannot imagine living anywhere else now. The space, the sky, the way everything is stripped down to essentials, it feels true somehow." "Yes," Beatrice agreed. "True, that is a good way to put it." They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to emerge. Robert realized this was the most at peace he had felt in months, maybe years. There was no pressure to perform or prove anything, no weight of expectations. Just two people sitting in the gathering dark, sharing space and silence. "I should get back," he finally said, though he was reluctant to break the spell. "Early start tomorrow, always is." Robert stood and retrieved his horse. As he mounted, Beatrice spoke again. "Robert," it was the first time she had used his given name. "Yes, thank you. For the lantern and blanket, and for taking a chance on me." "Best decision I have made in a long while," he said honestly, and rode off into the night before she could see how much he meant it. The work continued. By the start of the third week, Beatrice was putting saddle pads on the horses. By the fourth week, she had saddles on several of them, just letting them stand in the corral and get accustomed to the weight. The horses would shake and sidestep, but they did not panic and buck. They trusted the woman who had shown them such patience. Courage was the first one she mounted. Robert and several of the hands were watching, ready to jump in if things went wrong. Beatrice spent an hour just leaning across the stallion's back, letting him adjust to her weight. Then she slowly swung her leg over and settled into the saddle. The bay's ears swiveled back, listening to her. He shifted his weight but did not explode into the violent bucking that everyone expected. "Good boy," Beatrice murmured, stroking his neck. "You are so brave, so strong." She sat there for 10 minutes, not asking him to move, just being. Then she applied the gentlest pressure with her legs. Courage took one step forward, then another. Soon they were walking around the corral, horse and rider moving together as if they had been partners for years instead of minutes. Robert felt something shift in his chest as he watched them. It was not just admiration for her skill, though that was certainly present. It was something deeper, something that felt like recognition. Here was a woman who had been hurt and had survived, who had been told she was worthless and had proven them wrong, who faced down her fears every day and did the difficult work of building trust, despite every reason not to. She was not soft in the way society said women should be, but there was a deep well of compassion in her that showed itself in how she treated creatures others had given up on. She was extraordinary, and he was falling for her. The realization should have scared him. In many ways it did. Beatrice had made it clear she valued her independence above all else. She was not looking for a husband to take care of her or a man to define her worth. She was complete unto herself in a way that was both admirable and intimidating. But Robert could not help what he felt, and he found himself drawn to her again and again. He took to eating his lunch near the corral, ostensibly to keep an eye on the valuable horses, but really just to be near her. He found reasons to ride out to the cabin in the evenings, bringing small offerings. A sack of coffee, fresh vegetables from the garden the cook maintained, a book of poetry his sister had left behind. Beatrice accepted these gifts with polite thanks, but maintained her careful distance. If she suspected his growing feelings, she gave no sign. She remained focused on her work, on the horses, on the goal of completing the job she had been hired for. The other ranch hands noticed, of course. Men living in close quarters missed nothing. "Boss has got it bad for that horsewoman," Robert overheard one of them say. "Can you blame him? She is something special, that one. Too bad she does not seem interested. Maybe she is just careful. Woman alone learns to guard herself." Robert knew they were right on both counts. He did have it bad, and she was being careful. The question was whether her caution was just general self-protection or specific disinterest in him. He could not tell, and the not knowing was a special kind of torture. 6 weeks after Beatrice had arrived, all 30 horses were saddle broken and ready for work. They were not finished products by any means. They would need continued training and patience from whoever bought or rode them, but they were no longer wild and dangerous. They were gentled, willing partners who had learned to trust, despite every instinct telling them not to. Robert owed Beatrice $50 and knew that once he paid her, she would leave. The thought sat in his stomach like a stone. He could not ask her to stay without a job to justify it, and his pride would not let him invent false work just to keep her near. But the idea of watching her ride away, of never seeing her face across a campfire or hearing her soft voice talking to the horses, was nearly unbearable. He paid her in his office on a Friday afternoon, counting out the money in gold coins and paper notes. Beatrice accepted it without counting, trusting his honesty. She folded the money carefully and tucked it into an inner pocket of her jacket. "I will be leaving in the morning," she said. "Early before the heat gets too bad. Where will you go? North, maybe. I heard there is work in Prescott, or perhaps New Mexico. I have not decided yet." Robert felt a desperate need to say something, do something to make her stay, but what could he offer her that she wanted? She did not need him. She did not need anyone. That was the point, the thing she had fought so hard for. "The horses are grateful for what you did," he said instead, "even if they cannot say it. They said it in their own way." She smiled, a rare, full smile that transformed her face. "They are good horses. Whoever buys them will be lucky." I've had interest from the cavalry post at Fort Verde. They need mounts with stamina for the desert patrols. Those horses will serve well. They know this land in their bones." There was an awkward pause. Robert searched for words and found none adequate to what he was feeling. "Will you at least stay for dinner tonight?" he asked. "The cook makes a good stew on Fridays. You should have a proper meal before traveling." Beatrice hesitated, and Robert saw the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to say no to maintain her boundaries, but something made her reconsider. "All right," she agreed. "One meal." That evening, Robert had the cook set up a table on the wide porch of the ranch house, rather than having Beatrice eat with the hands in the bunkhouse or alone at the main table while the men stared. It was a compromise of sorts, semi-private but not too intimate. The sun was setting, and the temperature had dropped to something almost pleasant. The cook, a Mexican man named Miguel who had worked for Robert's father, outdid himself. There was beef stew thick with vegetables, fresh bread, and a dried apple pie that must have taken him hours. He also, Robert noted with a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment, had set the table with actual cloth napkins and the good plates. Beatrice looked at the spread with wide eyes. "This is too much. It is Friday. We always eat well on Friday." This was only partly true, but Robert said it with enough conviction that she did not question it. They ate as the sky darkened and the stars emerged. The conversation was easier than Robert expected, flowing between observations about the horses, stories from the ranch, and eventually more personal territory. Beatrice told him about a winter she had spent in the mountains of Colorado, working for a family who bred draft horses. Robert told her about learning to rope from an old vaquero who had worked for his grandfather, about the pride he had felt the first time he threw a perfect loop. "You love this place," Beatrice observed. "The ranch, it is in everything you say." "I do," Robert admitted. "It is not an easy love. This land takes everything you have and then asks for more. But yes, I love it. The work, the animals, the way every day brings something different. I could not imagine doing anything else." "You are lucky, then, to know where you belong. You do not feel that, like you belong somewhere." Beatrice was quiet for a long time. "I used to think belonging was about place. A town, a house, a piece of land, but I have never had that. Everywhere I have been an outsider, the woman who does not fit, who does not follow the rules. So I stopped looking for a place and started looking for a purpose instead." "And have you found it?" "I think so. The horses need someone like me, someone patient, someone who understands what it is to be wild and afraid and slowly learning to trust. That feels like purpose enough." Robert leaned forward. "But does it have to be either or? Could you not have purpose and place both?" Beatrice met his eyes, and in the lamplight he saw understanding dawn. She knew what he was really asking. Could she have purpose here? Could she stay? "Robert," she said gently, and the kindness in her voice was almost worse than if she had been harsh. "I have been on my own for 6 years. I have fought hard for my independence. I cannot give that up, not even for—" She trailed off. "Not even for what?" he pressed. "Not even for a good man with a good heart and a beautiful ranch." She said it simply, honestly. "You deserve someone who can be what you need. A partner, a wife, a woman who wants to build a life here, but I cannot be that. I am not made for staying." Robert felt the rejection even though he understood it. "What if I am not asking you to give up anything? What if I am just asking you to stay and see what happens?" "Nothing happens without changing everything," Beatrice said. "That is how these things work. Staying becomes expected. Expected becomes relied upon. Relied upon becomes necessary. And then one day I wake up and I am trapped again, answerable to someone else's needs and expectations. It would not be like that. You cannot promise that. No one can. They sat in heavy silence. Robert knew she was right, intellectually, but his heart raged against the logic. He wanted to argue that what he felt for her was different, that he would never trap her or take her freedom. But how many men had said the same thing while believing it absolutely, only to slowly, unconsciously tighten the bonds? "I care for you," he said finally, because it needed to be said. "I know you do not want to hear it, and I know you are leaving anyway, but I care for you, Beatrice Morgan. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I think, if you are honest, you care for me too." Beatrice did not deny it. She looked down at her hands, rough and scarred from years of hard work. "Caring is not enough. I have learned that the hard way. Caring does not change the fundamental incompatibility of what we want from life. What if what I want is you? However you come, whatever that means. You say that now, but eventually you would want more. You would want me here all the time, running your house, bearing your children, being a proper rancher's wife. And I cannot be that. I would resent it, and you would resent me for not being able to give you what you need." Robert wanted to argue more, but he could see the pain in her face. This was hurting her too, he realized. She was not cold or indifferent. She was protecting herself in the only way she knew how, by leaving before things got complicated, before caring turned into something that could truly wound. "Can I ask you one thing?" Robert said. "What?" "Stay one more week. Not as my employee, not as anything but yourself. Just stay and see how it feels. If after 7 days you still want to leave, I will personally provision your horse and wish you well with no hard feelings. But give it 1 week. Give us 1 week." Beatrice looked torn. He could see the war happening behind her eyes, caution battling against something else, something that looked like longing. 7 days, she said finally. "But I keep my own space. I stay at the cabin, of course. And if I decide to leave on day 3 or day 5, you will not try to stop me. You have my word." She studied his face as if trying to determine if he was trustworthy. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "All right. 7 days." Robert felt something loosen in his chest. It was not victory, not yet, but it was possibility, and that was more than he had a moment ago. The next morning, Beatrice did not saddle up and ride away. Instead, she walked out to the corral where the now gentle mustangs waited. Robert had decided not to sell them immediately. He told himself it was because they needed more training, but truthfully it was because they were a link to Beatrice, and he was not ready to sever that connection. She spent the morning working with Courage and 3 other horses, teaching them more advanced commands, getting them comfortable with trail obstacles. Robert watched from a distance, giving her space but unable to stay away entirely. That afternoon, Beatrice surprised him by coming to find him in the barn where he was repairing a broken harness. "I thought maybe I could see more of the ranch," she said. "If you have time to show me." Robert set down the leather he had been working immediately. "I have time." They saddled horses, Beatrice choosing Courage and Robert mounting his own reliable gelding. He took her out to see the full extent of the Double K, riding over land that stretched for thousands of acres. He showed her the water sources, the good grazing areas, the distant mountains that marked the boundaries of his property. They stopped at a high point where the view opened up to show the vast sweep of desert and sky. It was beautiful in a stark way, all muted colors and sharp contrasts. "This is what you are tied to," Beatrice said. "When you say you love the ranch, this is what you mean. Part of it, but it is also the work itself, the satisfaction of building something, maintaining something. Every fence I repair, every calf that survives, every season we make it through, it all adds up to something bigger than myself. That must be a good feeling. It is, but it can be lonely too." Robert looked at her. "I think that is why your presence here has mattered so much. You understand the work in a way most people do not. You see the value in it. Beatrice was quiet, her eyes on the distant horizon. I do understand. I just do not know if understanding is the same as wanting it for myself. Then what do you want, Beatrice? Truly. She considered the question seriously. I want to wake up each morning and decide for myself what that day will hold. I want to work with horses because I choose to, not because it is expected. I want to not be afraid that someone will take it all away from me. Has someone tried to take it away? More than once. Her voice went hard. I worked on a ranch in New Mexico for 3 months. The foreman's son decided he wanted me. When I said no, he told his father I was stealing. I was run off without even the wages I had earned. Another time in Colorado, the rancher's wife decided I was a threat because her husband spoke to me sometimes. She made up lies about me until I had no choice but to leave. I have learned that depending on others means giving them power to hurt you. Robert felt his anger rise at the injustices she had suffered. Not everyone is like that. No, but enough are that it is safer to assume the worst and be pleasantly surprised than to trust and be betrayed. Is that any way to live? It has kept me alive this long. Robert could not argue with that. But he could see the cost of her survival strategy, the walls she had built to protect herself, and the isolation those walls created. They rode back as the afternoon light began to slant golden across the land. At the barn, as they were unsaddling, Robert spoke again. Tomorrow would you teach me how you work with the horses? Beatrice looked surprised. You already know how to work horses. Not like you do, I want to understand it. Your methods. She studied him, trying to determine his motivation. Finally she nodded. All right, tomorrow. That evening they ate together again, though this time it was simple fare, bread and cheese and cold meat. They sat on the cabin porch and talked about small things, easy things. The pressure of the previous night's conversation was gone, replaced by something more comfortable. Over the following days, a routine developed. Mornings, Beatrice would teach Robert her techniques. He proved an apt student, patient and observant. She explained how to read a horse's body language, how to move in ways that did not trigger their flight response, how to build trust through consistency and gentleness. You cannot force partnership, she said as they worked with a sorrel mare who was still skittish about being saddled. You have to earn it every single day, and some days you will take steps backward. That is natural. Trust is not a straight line. Robert thought that wisdom applied to more than just horses. Afternoons they rode out together. Robert showed Beatrice all his favorite places on the ranch. The canyon where a spring created a surprising pocket of green, the old line shack his grandfather had built, the ridge where eagles nested. And Beatrice, slowly, began to share more of herself. She told him about the horses she had worked with over the years, each one a distinct personality. She told him about sleeping under the stars when she had no money for a hotel, about the kindness of strangers who had helped her when they had no reason to, about the stunning beauty she had witnessed in her wanderings. On the 4th evening, they were sitting by a small fire near the stock tank, watching the stars emerge, when Robert reached over and took her hand. Beatrice tensed, but did not pull away. His hand was warm and calloused, rough from work in the same way hers was. I am falling in love with you, Robert said quietly. I know that is not what you want to hear. I know it complicates things, but it is the truth and I will not lie to you. Beatrice was silent for a long time. The fire crackled. In the distance, a cow lowed softly. I am terrified, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, because I am falling in love with you too, and I do not know how to do that without losing myself. Robert turned to face her fully. What if loving me did not mean losing yourself? What if it meant finding more of yourself? How? I do not have all the answers, but I know that you make me want to be better. More patient, more observant, more open. You challenge me in ways I did not even know I needed. Maybe I could do the same for you. But the ranch, your life here, it would require me to stay, to commit. And I have never done that. Then maybe it is time to try, not because you have to, not because I am forcing you, but because you want to see what is possible when you stop running. Beatrice looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. What if I fail? What if I cannot do it? Then we figure it out together. But Beatrice, you have faced down wild mustangs that would have killed most men. You survived an abusive father and 6 years on your own in a world that is not kind to women alone. You are one of the strongest people I have ever met. If you decide you want this, I have no doubt you will succeed. I have 3 days left in our week. I know. I need those 3 days, to think, to be sure. Take them. Robert rode back to the ranch house that night feeling raw and vulnerable in a way he had not experienced before. He had laid his heart bare, and now he had to wait to see if Beatrice would choose him or choose the safety of her solitude. The next 2 days were both beautiful and painful. Beatrice did not avoid him, but there was a distance in her manner. A part of herself she had pulled back to a protected place while she made her decision. They still worked together, still rode together, but the easy intimacy of the previous days was gone, replaced by a careful politeness that hurt more than anger would have. On the 6th evening, Robert did not ride out to the cabin. He gave Beatrice the space she had asked for, though every instinct told him to go to her, to plead his case one more time. Instead, he sat on his own porch and watched the sun set and wondered what he would do if she left. He could go back to how things were before she arrived. He could run the ranch, manage the men, breed horses and cattle and live a perfectly acceptable life. But it would be a half-life now, always shadowed by the memory of a dark-haired woman who had shown him what connection could feel like. Night fell. Robert went to bed but could not sleep. He lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle, and tried to prepare himself for loss. He was up before dawn, habits too ingrained to break even in emotional turmoil. He made coffee and stood on the porch watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to the pale gold that preceded the sun. A figure was walking toward the house. Even in the dim light, Robert recognized Beatrice's purposeful stride. His heart began to pound. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked tired, as if she had not slept much either, but there was a calmness in her face that had not been there the day before. "I have been thinking," Beatrice said without preamble, "and I have been running for 6 years. Every time things got complicated or uncomfortable or required me to be vulnerable, I ran. And I told myself it was strength, that independence meant never needing anyone. But watching you these past weeks, seeing how you care for this place and the people here, I realized something." "What is that?" "True strength is not running from fear, it is facing it. And I am afraid of what might happen if I stay, but I am more afraid of what I will lose if I leave." She took a deep breath. "So I am choosing to stay, not because you convinced me, not because I need you, but because I want to try. I want to see what we could build together." Robert felt emotion swell in his chest so strong it nearly choked him. He came down the steps and stood in front of her, close enough to see the determination and hope and fear all mingled in her expression. "You are sure?" "I am terrified." "But yes, I am sure." Robert pulled her into his arms and Beatrice held on tight, her face pressed against his shoulder. They stood like that for a long time, two scarred and wary people choosing to take a chance on each other despite every reason not to. "We will figure it out as we go," Robert said into her hair. "The ranch can be your home base. You can still work with horses. You can still have your independence. We will make it work however it needs to work. You say that now, and I will keep saying it, because I mean it. Beatrice pulled back enough to look up at him. I am not very good at being vulnerable, I have noticed. And I do not know how to be a rancher's wife. I cannot cook much beyond basic camp food. I do not sew or manage a household. I am going to be terrible at all the things people will expect. Then we will find someone to cook and someone to clean, and you will do what you do best. There is no rule that says you have to be like other ranchers' wives. People will talk. People always talk. Let them. A small smile tugged at Beatrice's mouth. You make it sound simple. It will not be simple, but it will be worth it. Beatrice stretched up on her toes and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence. Robert cradled her face in his hands, pouring everything he felt into that kiss, all the longing and hope and love that he had been carrying. When they finally broke apart, the sun was cresting the horizon, painting the world in shades of rose and gold. So what happens now? Beatrice asked. Now. Now we have breakfast, and then we work, and then we have dinner, and we do it again tomorrow. We build a life one day at a time. That sounds almost manageable. Almost, Robert agreed with a smile. The next weeks unfolded with a gentle domesticity that surprised them both. Beatrice moved her few belongings to the main house, though she kept the cabin as her workspace and retreat, a place she could go when she needed solitude. Robert hired a housekeeper and gave Beatrice free rein to organize her days however she wanted. Beatrice continued working with horses. Word spread about her skill, and people began bringing her difficult animals from ranches all over the territory. A horse that had been abused and would not let anyone touch it. A valuable mare that had nearly killed her owner. A green-broke colt that was too smart for traditional methods. Beatrice worked with them all, slowly building a reputation that made men willing to travel for days to seek her expertise. Robert supported her completely. He built her a better corral with a covered area so she could work in shade. He helped with the difficult horses when she needed an extra set of hands. He learned from her, incorporating her gentler methods into his own work. They were not without conflicts. Beatrice still struggled with asking for help, with admitting when she needed something. Robert sometimes fell into old patterns of trying to make decisions without consulting her. But they learned to talk through their issues, to extend each other the same patience they showed the horses. 3 months after Beatrice chose to stay, Robert found her in the barn late one evening. She was sitting with a traumatized gelding that had arrived that morning, just being present while the animal slowly relaxed. Robert sat down next to her in the hay. I have been thinking, he said, about making this official, us, I mean. Beatrice looked at him. Official how? Marriage, if you want. I know you do not care about what society thinks, and neither do I really. But I want people to know that you are mine and I am yours. I want to stand up in front of everyone and claim you and have you claim me. Marriage, Beatrice repeated slowly, as if testing the word. It would not change anything between us, just make it legal and public. Everything changes with marriage. Legally, I would become your property. I could not own anything, could not enter contracts. Every freedom I have would be given to you to control. Robert had not thought about that, the legal realities for women in 1882. Then we will draw up a contract beforehand. My lawyer can make it legal. Everything you earn stays yours. You keep your independence. I just want my ring on your finger and your name next to mine. Why does it matter? Robert thought about how to explain. Because I want everyone to know how proud I am to have you choose me. Because I want to build a legacy with you, and I want it recognized. Because saying vows in front of witnesses makes a promise more real somehow. Beatrice was quiet for a long time. The gelding had lowered his head, drowsing now that he felt safe. Outside, the evening insects sang their rhythmic songs. "Ask me properly," Beatrice finally said. Robert shifted to kneel in front of her, taking both her hands in his. "Beatrice Morgan, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me here on this ranch that you have already made better just by being here? Will you let me love you and support you and be your partner in all things for as long as we both live?" "Yes," Beatrice said, and tears tracked down her face even as she smiled. "Yes, I will marry you." Robert kissed her there in the hay with the traumatized horse as their only witness, and it felt perfect and true in a way nothing else ever had. They were married 6 weeks later in November of 1882. It was a small ceremony in Vulture City's church, with just a handful of witnesses including the ranch hands and a few townspeople who had become friendly with Beatrice. She wore a simple dress of dark blue cotton, practical and unadorned. Robert wore his best suit, which he had bought for his father's funeral and had not worn since. The minister, a balding man who had seen his share of unconventional couples in the wild Arizona territory, spoke about partnership and mutual respect. Beatrice had insisted on changes to the traditional vows, removing the promise to obey. The minister had agreed without argument. He had watched Beatrice gentle those wild mustangs and had no illusions about this being a traditional marriage. When Robert slipped a simple gold band on her finger, Beatrice felt a catch in her throat. She had never thought she would be here making vows, choosing to tie her life to another person's. But looking at Robert's honest face, feeling the strength and gentleness in his hands, she knew it was right. They celebrated with a dinner at the ranch, Miguel cooking a feast of roasted beef and fresh tortillas and vegetables from the garden. There was music from a ranch hand who played fiddle, and dancing on the wide porch under the stars. Beatrice danced with Robert, letting him lead her in a simple waltz, and discovered that happiness could be as simple as moving together in rhythm while the night air cooled around them. That night, when they were finally alone in Robert's room, which was now their room, Beatrice felt suddenly shy. She had been so focused on the emotional aspects of committing to Robert that she had not let herself think much about the physical intimacy that came with marriage. Robert seemed to sense her hesitation. "We have all the time in the world," he said gently. "There is no rush." "I am not afraid," Beatrice said, which was not entirely true. "I just want to do this right. There is no right or wrong, just us figuring it out together." He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her softly. "I love you, Beatrice Kendrick, and we will take this at whatever pace you need." The name sounded strange to her ears, that new surname that marked her as part of his family. But it also felt good, like an anchor point she had not known she needed. They explored each other slowly that night, learning what brought pleasure, what felt good, what made the other gasp and sigh. There was awkwardness and laughter and tenderness. And when they finally joined together, Beatrice felt a completeness that she had not imagined was possible, as if a piece of herself she had not known was missing had finally clicked into place. Afterward, lying in Robert's arms with her head on his chest, Beatrice whispered, "I am glad I stayed." "So am I," Robert said, pressing a kiss to her hair. "So am I." The years that followed were not without challenges. The ranch faced droughts and cattle disease and market fluctuations that tested them. Beatrice still struggled sometimes with her need for independence clashing with the compromises of partnership. Robert still sometimes forgot to consult her before making decisions that affected them both. But they worked through each issue with the same patience and persistence they applied to difficult horses. Beatrice's reputation as a horse gentler continued to grow. People came from as far away as California and New Mexico to have her work with their animals. She charged good money for her services and kept every penny in her own account, as Robert had promised. That financial independence gave her a security she had never felt before. In the spring of 1884, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mixture of joy and terror. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had never let herself want children because she had been so focused on mere survival. But now, with her hand on her still flat stomach, she felt a fierce, protective love already growing. She told Robert that evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual that had become sacred to them. "I am going to have a baby," she said without preamble. Robert turned to her, his face cycling through surprise, joy, and concern in rapid succession. "Are you all right? Are you happy about it?" "I am terrified," Beatrice admitted. "I do not know how to be a mother. I do not know if I will be any good at it." "You will be wonderful," Robert said with absolute confidence. "You have the most patient, loving heart of anyone I have ever met. Look at what you do with the horses. Horses are not children. No, but the principles are the same: consistency, patience, respect. You know how to build trust and provide safety. That is what children need most." Beatrice wanted to believe him. She leaned into his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her. "We will figure it out together," she said, repeating the words that had become their mantra. Their daughter was born in December of 1884, a long, difficult labor that left Beatrice exhausted but triumphant. They named her Grace, for the grace that had brought them together despite all odds. She had dark hair like her mother and her father's steady brown eyes. Beatrice took to motherhood with the same focused determination she brought to everything. She nursed her daughter while sitting in the corral with the horses, so that Grace's first memories would be the smell of hay and horses. She carried her in a sling while she worked, talking to her constantly, explaining what she was doing and why. Robert was a doting father, completely besotted with his tiny daughter. He would hold her for hours, walking the porch at night when she was fussy, singing off-key lullabies that somehow soothed her anyway. As Grace grew, it became clear she had inherited her mother's affinity for animals. By age 2, she could sit perfectly still and have the barn cats come to her. By age 4, she was helping her mother with the gentling work, her small voice mimicking the soothing tones Beatrice used with frightened horses. They had 2 more children over the years, a son they named Daniel in 1886, and another daughter they named Sarah in 1889. The ranch house that had been so quiet when Robert lived alone was now full of noise and laughter and the chaos of family life. Beatrice never stopped working with horses, though she took breaks when the children were very young. She could not imagine giving up that part of herself, and Robert never asked her to. They hired help for the household chores and childcare, women from town who were grateful for the work and respectful of the unconventional way the Kendrick household operated. The children grew up watching their parents work side by side, watching their mother command respect from hardened cowboys, watching their father cook dinner when their mother was working late with a difficult animal. They learned that partnership meant flexibility, that love meant supporting each other's dreams, that family could be built on mutual respect rather than rigid roles. On a warm evening in June of 1895, Robert and Beatrice sat on their porch watching the sun set over land they had built a life on. It had been 13 years since that day when Beatrice walked into a corral full of wild mustangs, and Robert watched from the fence and knew he had found his equal. Grace was 16 now, working as her mother's apprentice, and showing the same remarkable talent for understanding horses. Daniel was 9, interested in the business side of ranching and already helping Robert with the accounts. Sarah was 6, a wild spirit who spent most of her time exploring the canyons and bringing home rocks and feathers and interesting insects. "Did you ever imagine this?" Robert asked, gesturing to the house full of children's laughter, The barn where Beatrice still worked her magic with difficult horses, the land stretching out around them. Never, Beatrice admitted. For so long I could not imagine anything beyond the next day, the next job, the next place. Building something permanent felt impossible. But you did it anyway. We did it. She took his hand, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. I could not have done this alone. You gave me the safety to try, the support to grow. You kept your promises. You did the hard part. You chose to trust despite every reason not to. That took more courage than anything I have ever done. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the corral, Beatrice could see the descendants of those first wild mustangs she had gentled. The herd had grown over the years, each generation a little less wild but no less magnificent. She had made it her mission to preserve their spirit even as she taught them to work with humans. You ever regret it? Robert asked. Staying, giving up the freedom to wander. Beatrice considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the simplicity of those years, just me and a horse and the open road, but I would not trade what we have built for anything. This ranch, our children, our life together. This is more than I ever let myself dream of. I am proud of you, Robert said. Of the mother you have become, the businesswoman you are. You have trained more horses and built a bigger reputation than I ever did. But mostly I am proud that you are my partner, my equal in all things. Beatrice turned to kiss him, a sweet familiar kiss that still made her heart flutter even after all these years. And I am grateful every day that you saw past the defensive walls to the person I was trying to become. You gave me space to grow into myself. As the stars began to emerge, their children came tumbling out onto the porch. Sarah wanted to show them a beetle she had found. Daniel wanted to discuss a financial problem he had discovered in the accounts. Grace wanted advice on a particularly stubborn paint horse someone had brought in that afternoon. Robert and Beatrice listened to their children with full attention, offering guidance and praise and the occasional correction. This was their life now, this beautiful chaotic fullness that Beatrice had once thought impossible for someone like her. Later, after the children were in bed, Beatrice walked out to the corral one last time. Courage was still there, now 19 years old and no longer used for work, but allowed to live out his days in peace. He came to her immediately when she called, nuzzling her shoulder with the same gentle affection he had shown for years. You were the start of everything, Beatrice told him, stroking his graying muzzle. You were the first one to trust me here, and because of you I learned to trust too. The bay stallion exhaled softly, his breath warm on her hands. Beatrice rested her forehead against his neck and felt gratitude wash through her. For this horse who had been her first victory. For Robert who had seen her worth when she barely saw it herself. For the children who gave her life such purpose and joy. For this land that had challenged her and shaped her and ultimately welcomed her. She was no longer the outcast woman, alone and defensive and running from her past. She was Beatrice Kendrick, horse gentler, wife, mother, businesswoman. She belonged here to this place and these people. And they belonged to her. Robert came out to find her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Together they stood in the darkness, listening to the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, breathing in the desert air that smelled of dust and sage and home. I love you, Beatrice said, leaning back against Robert's solid warmth. I love you too. Always have. Always will. They stood there for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting. The wild herd that Beatrice had gentled had taught her the most important lesson. That strength was not in staying solitary and untouchable, but in having the courage to connect, to trust, to build something bigger than yourself. And she had done exactly that. She had built a family, a business, a legacy. She had taken the raw materials of her pain and survival and forged them into something beautiful. Not through force or dominance, but through patience and persistence, and the kind of love that respected wildness even as it created partnership. The years continued to pass. Grace eventually married a young veterinarian who shared her passion for horses, and they started their own breeding operation on land adjacent to the Double K. Daniel proved to have a genius for business and expanded the ranch's operations, creating contracts with the cavalry and stage lines throughout the territory. Sarah became a naturalist, studying the desert ecosystem and publishing papers that brought her recognition throughout the scientific community. Robert and Beatrice aged together, their hair graying, their faces growing more lined, but their love deepening with each passing year. They still rode out together when they could, still sat on the porch in the evenings, still worked with horses side by side. The partnership they had built proved unshakable, tested by time and circumstances, and emerging stronger for it. On their 20th anniversary in 1902, their children threw them a party. The ranch was full of people. Their children and grandchildren, ranch hands past and present, townspeople from Vulture City, clients who had brought their horses to Beatrice over the years. There were speeches and toasts, and a cake that Miguel had spent days preparing. When it was Beatrice's turn to speak, she stood with Robert beside her and looked out at all the faces. 20 years ago, I was a woman alone who had learned to depend only on herself. I thought that was strength. But Robert taught me that real strength is in connection, in partnership, in having the courage to be vulnerable. He taught me that I did not have to choose between my independence and love, that I could have both if I was willing to do the hard work of building something together. She turned to look at her husband, her partner, the man who had changed her life simply by seeing her clearly and loving what he saw. Thank you for watching me that day with the wild herd. Thank you for recognizing something in me worth staying for. Thank you for every day since then. Robert pulled her close and kissed her forehead, too moved to speak. The crowd cheered and laughed and wiped away tears. The party continued late into the night, but eventually everyone left or went to bed. Robert and Beatrice found themselves alone on their porch once again, in the spot that had become the heart of their home. "You remember that first week?" Beatrice asked. "When you asked me to stay for 7 days, I remember being terrified you would leave after day 1. I almost did. I packed my things 3 times that week, but something kept stopping me." "What?" The look in your eyes. "You saw me, Robert, really saw me. Not the defensive exterior or the reputation or the novelty of a woman doing man's work. You saw the person underneath, the one I was trying to become. And you liked what you saw. That was irresistible. You made it easy. You are the most remarkable person I have ever known." Beatrice laughed. "I think you might be biased, absolutely, but also correct." They sat in comfortable silence, hands clasped, watching the stars wheel overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a horse whinnied. Another answered. The sounds of the ranch at night, familiar as breathing. "I would do it all again," Beatrice said quietly. "Every hard moment, every fear, every challenge, I would choose it all again because it led me here, to you, to this life." "Me too," Robert agreed. "Though I would have been less of an idiot about some things if I had a second chance." "You were not an idiot. You were patient and kind and exactly what I needed even when I did not know I needed it." They stayed on the porch until the night air grew cool, until the moon had risen high and cast silver shadows across the land. Then they went inside, to their room, to their bed, to the life they had built one choice at a time. Beatrice Morgan had come to Vulture City as an outcast, a woman who fit nowhere and belonged to no one. But she had left as Beatrice Kendrick, surrounded by family, respected by her community, the owner of a thriving business and a full heart. She had tamed a wild herd, and in doing so had learned to trust herself enough to let someone else in. She had found her equal in a cowboy who had watched her work and recognized a kindred spirit. And together, they had built something more lasting than any individual achievement could ever be. They had built a home, a family, a partnership that honored both their strengths and supported their growth. They had proven that love did not have to mean losing yourself, that commitment did not have to mean sacrifice, that two strong people could build something together that made them both better. The wild herd had been the beginning, but it was not the end. It was simply the door that opened to let Beatrice step into the life she deserved, the life she had been too afraid to imagine. And once she walked through that door, once she chose to stay and see what was possible, she discovered that home was not a trap, but a foundation. Independence was not about being alone, but about having the strength to choose connection. On quiet mornings, when Beatrice walked out to the corrals and saw horses who had learned to trust, when she felt Robert's arms around her and heard her children's voices raised in laughter, when she looked out over the land she had helped build into something prosperous and good, she felt a peace that the younger version of herself could never have comprehended. She had been wild once, defensive and afraid, running from every threat real or imagined. But she had learned what the mustangs learned, that trust was possible, that partnership could be freeing, that gentleness was not weakness but strength. And in learning those lessons, in living them every day with the man who had given her space to grow, and the children who gave her reason to keep growing, Beatrice had found something more precious than safety or independence or success. She had found home. She had found love. She had found herself. And in the end, that was the wildest and most beautiful adventure of all.